Chapter 4. Dada and Jazz. Indy opened the door of the jungle, a boit in Montparnasse. It was early, and he was relieved to see that the tables the Dada crowd usually claimed near the door were empty. He wasn't in any mood to listen to their banter. They were, for the most part, arrogant cynics who enjoyed insulting virtually anyone who walked in the door. He looked around, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. The ceiling was layered with copper, the walls were wooden, and the small bar was trimmed with copper. Hanging high overhead were several dim Victorian candelabras, and a balcony with more tables encircled the place. At one end of the nightclub, under a lip of the balcony, was a small wooden stage. A single red light bulb glowed above it, spilling light onto an upright piano and a set of drums. Only 3 or 4 tables were occupied, and at one of them near the bar, Indy spotted the lone figure bent over in concentration as he scribbled something on a sheet of paper. Light from a burning candle stuck inside an empty wine bottle streaked the man's red hair. Indy strolled over and pulled out a chair. "Hey, Jack." "Indy," Shannon said without looking up. "Kinda early." "I know." He eased down in the chair and noticed how a strand of Shannon's unkempt hair hung dangerously close to the candle's flame. His old college roommate had been living in Paris for the past year, after quitting his job with the trucking company in Chicago. Although he'd kept his bargain with his family and hadn't played in any clubs, he'd practiced nightly in his apartment, collected dozens of new jazz records, and all the while saved his money and planned his escape to Paris. "I want to talk to you about something." "Go ahead." Shannon looked up for the first time. "What's on your mind?" He told Shannon about Bellicamis's offer. "I just heard about it today, and I'm still trying to sort everything out." Shannon set his pencil on the table. "Let me buy you a drink. I think you need one." He raised a hand, caught the eye of the bartender, and ordered 2 Pernod's. "Tell me more about this woman, this professor of yours." "Not really much to tell. I don't know her very well." A sly smile altered the shape of his mouth. "Not yet, anyway." Shannon didn't seem amused. "If I were you, I'd ask around before I took off with her. I'd find out what she's all about." Shannon the analyst. Ah, come on. You think she'd just make this up so she can go home to Greece in the middle of the semester and take me with her? I don't know. It seems to me that she could be playing you for a sucker. Jack, for Christ's sake, we're not on the South Side making some gangster deal. Shannon stared coldly at him, and Indy realized it was the wrong thing to say. "I'm sorry. It's just that if you'd sat in on one of her classes, you'd know she isn't that type. She's serious, intelligent, and beautiful," Shannon added. "Right?" "That too. Just watch yourself. It sounds sort of suspicious to me." "Why?" "Look, if you were an archaeology student, I wouldn't think twice about it. But you're not." Indy shrugged off the remark. "Look, it's an opportunity, a good one, and I don't want to pass it up on account of some vague suspicion." Shannon held up his hands. "Hey, I'm not arguing with you. I'm just telling you what I think. You know how ambivalent I've felt about life as a scholar. Maybe this is what I've been looking for, a career with some adventure. I'm not sure about the career, but I bet your professor is going to be an adventure. Hell, I don't know. Maybe it's just what you need." As their drinks arrived, Indy looked around and was surprised by the number of tables that were now occupied. It was as if a crowd had seeped out of the wall. "To Greece," Shannon toasted. "Hope it works out." Indy sipped his Pernod, then nodded at the scrap of paper in front of Shannon. "What were you writing?" "Just a song." "A song? For the band?" "Sure." "Who's gonna sing?" The band was Shannon on cornet, a piano player from Brooklyn whose professional experience had been limited to performances at bar mitzvahs, and a Parisian drummer who'd never played jazz until he'd heard Shannon's records. None of them sang, as far as Indy knew. Shannon waved the paper in the candlelight. I'm looking for a singer. A woman. She's got to be real sultry with a deep voice. No sopranos. If we were in Chicago, I could go down to the Gardens or Dreamland and have my choice of ladies fitting the bill. I suppose. Not too many of them visiting Paris, though. Oh, they'll be here, Indy. He leaned forward, his eyes bright with sudden excitement. You look at the crowds we get here with this make-do band. They're hungering for jazz in this town. The bands will be coming here. Lots of them. Listen and tell me what you think. This is called Down in the Quarter. Shannon frowned at the paper, then started reciting. You know I fled Chicago late in 21, floated on across the river and never did see the sun. Finally landed in the quarter, left side of the Seine, but found so many Americans thought I was back from where I came. Down in the quarter, down in the quarter. Meet you tonight, down in the quarter. Shannon shrugged. That's all I've got so far. Why don't you say thought I was going insane for your last line on the first verse instead of back from where I came? Because it's not true. Besides, the number of beats is wrong. Indy nodded. I like it. Never knew you wrote songs. Well, it's just words on paper now, but I think I've got some real gutsy love songs in me. Gotta find that singer, though. Indy laughed. Ha! I think you're looking for more than just a singer. They both turned as they heard a ruckus near the door. Chairs clattered. People shouted. Indy peered over his shoulder. What's going on? Looks like they're arguing about the table. The Dada gang. Should have guessed, Indy said dryly. They had taken over two tables on either side of the door, and now one of the men was rapping on the tables and chanting what sounded like Sar, Sar, Sar. The other chimed in Arf, Arf, Arf. What are they saying? Zara and Arp. Tristan Zara is a poet. Jean Arp is an artist. I heard they were going to be here tonight. So it's going to be a Dada sort of evening, Indy said unenthusiastically. Shannon knocked back the rest of his drink. They're really not a bad bunch. Just sort of abrasive sometimes towards anyone they see as standing for traditional ways. Towards anyone who walks in the door, Indy remarked. It rubbed me the wrong way. They're making a break, Indy. We need people like that to wake us up sometimes. I agree, but they're as dependent on tradition as anyone, maybe more so. How can you say that? Where would they be without tradition, Jack? If there were no traditions, there would be no basis for non-traditional art. Shannon grinned and shook his head. Yeah, I guess so. But like I said, we need people who show us a way of breaking the old molds. If we don't do something different soon, we'll blow ourselves up in another war. You're making a break, Jack, but I bet you don't spit on priests and nuns. How's that sort of behavior going to stop us from making wars? Indy, they spat on their own friends. It was an event, you know. They were just dressed like nuns and priests. Shannon stood up. So, you staying around? Just for the first set. Listen, you serious about Greece? I don't know, Jack. I gotta think about it. He punched Indy on the shoulder. I've got the feeling you're going. The club was crowded by the time the band was midway through the set. Indy emptied his second glass of Pernod just as a solo by Shannon came to a close. The green licorice-tasting drink was taking its effect, and he felt like walking. He debated whether he'd go over to the bar for one more drink or leave right away. He pulled on his leather jacket and looked for his hat. He peered under the table and on the other chairs. Finally, he reached up and felt it on his head. Yeah, it was definitely time to leave. He stood up and looked towards the stage. Shannon was pattering about the next song. I first heard this tune in a place called Dreamland in the Windy City, he said, as Indy threaded his way through the tables. The song's by Freddie Keppard's band. Kep doesn't record his music. Says he's afraid people will steal his tunes. He's right, because I remembered this one. It goes something like this. As the song began and Indy headed towards the door, the Dadaist looked him over. Hey, "Where'd you get that jacket?" one of them called out. "You going on a bombing mission?" Everyone at the two tables started chanting, "Arp! Arp! Arp! Arp!" like a pack of seals, Indy thought. A real swell bunch. "You got something against our German brothers?" another shouted in Indy's face. "Save it for an old lady or a nun," he snapped, and moved on. As he reached for the door, something hit him in the back. Alcohol splattered his neck. He stopped and turned. "That's for the Red Baron's mother, Ace!" a bespectacled man yelled from the table on his left. "Sarah! Sarah! Sarah! Sarah!" the crowd shouted in cadence. Indy stepped over to the man, jerked the chair out from under him, then grabbed the edge of the table and stood it on end. Drinks crashed to the floor. The wine bottle with the candle in it shattered. The flame hissed for a moment, then went out. Suddenly the music stopped and everyone in the club turned to see what was going on. No one moved or said a word for a long moment. Then a voice boomed from the stage. "That's my friend Indiana Jones, all the way from Chicago," Shannon said. "He turned over a table on the South Side one night, but that was his own table. I think he was looking for his hat." "What an asshole," someone said. "Hey, do our table, man." Indy started backing towards the door, but Shannon wasn't finished. "Then another time, this is the true story, he hung George Washington, the first president of the United States, and three of his friends from lampposts at the University of Chicago. Imagine that. A real traditional sort of guy. Well, he had his reasons. But watch out for him next Bastille Day." Indy smiled, tipped his hat towards the stage, and left the jungle. As he walked down the street, he felt the dampness on his neck and hair chilling him, but he ignored it. It was his own fault. Why had he let the bastards get the better of him? He could have just ignored them and left. Instead, he'd played their game with them, and they'd got just what they wanted: a reaction. He wandered aimlessly around the Latin Quarter, his thoughts drifting from Dadaist to his impending decision. Maybe it was time for him to leave Paris. He needed a change. He needed something. He passed a theater with a marquee advertising several serials from the Perils of Pauline. He slowed and glanced at the poster in the front window, which showed a blonde hanging by her fingertips from a cliff. He smiled. He'd grown up on that stuff. Pauline never failed to get herself in a bad fix. If she wasn't dangling from an airplane or facing a roaring locomotive, she was trapped in a snake pit, sinking in quicksand, or chained in a dungeon. He looked at another window displaying coming attractions: the Death Ray, the Poisoned Room, and the Blood Crystals. He would be gone before the serials arrived, he thought. He moved on. Now he knew he was leaving. He walked for nearly an hour and finally found himself back in Montparnasse and outside a neighborhood dance hall. He knew he'd stopped here because this was Madeline's favorite bal musette, and one of the first to move from the Luxembourg district. Soon, no doubt, they would all be located in the Latin Quarter. Popular trends, it seemed, always followed the artists by a few years, and the Bohemian crowd was well ensconced here, just as the Impressionists of the last century had been in the Montmartre district. Inside, dancers were foxtrotting to an accordion player and a violinist. The crowd was young and well behaved compared to the jungle or any of the boys. Once on the dance floor, the men never even spoke to the women they asked to dance. It was considered uncouth. In some ways, things hadn't changed much since the days of the minuet. "Indy, I haven't seen you for ages. How are you?" Madeline said in her high, squeaky voice. He turned and she planted a light kiss on his cheek. She was as vibrant and bright-eyed as ever. Her short bobbed hair curled around her shapely sculptured face, softening it. "I'm okay. How about you?" He cursed himself for not noticing her first. He hadn't really expected to see her and didn't particularly want to talk to her, but now he didn't have a choice. "I'm wonderful, and it's a wonderful night." She tilted her head, listening to the music as a new song began. "Do you want to dance? We can do the Java to this one." Her hand slid down his arm and gripped his fingers. She took a couple of steps and her body swayed in front of him. No, thanks. I'm not up to dancing tonight. Madeline was her usual exuberant self, the life of the party, and acting as if nothing had come between them. You're no fun, Indy, she pouted. I'm going to Greece, he blurted, as though his pressing trip would make him more interesting to her, worthy of her attention. What? Greece? How splendid! Can you take me along? I'd love to see Greece. Short memory, he thought. I seem to remember you saying you didn't want to see me again because you thought we were getting too serious. You wanted to be free. I think that's the way you put it. Well, I am free. We don't have to get married to see Greece, do we? It's an archaeology field trip to Delphi. I'll be working and I can't take anyone with me. Oh, so you need to be free. Indy grinned. You got it. Madeline, there you are, a man called out as he approached them. He glanced at Indy. Jonesy, what a surprise. Give up on the dead languages for the night? Then he looked at Madeline again. We going to dance, love? Indy knew the handsome young British man as Brent, one of Madeline's acquaintances. Like her, he seemed to do nothing but float from dance hall to dance hall, cafe to cafe with the same crowd. There were more like him in the Latin Quarter every day. If given a choice of spending the evening with Brent and his crowd or being abused by the Dadaists, Indy would be hard pressed to choose. Brent, guess what? Indy's going to Greece, to a place called Delphi, and he won't take me with him. Her voice squeaked to a new high. Brent shrugged. I'll take you to Greece any time you want, darling. Paris is getting so dreadfully boring. But let's dance right now. My legs won't stop moving. With that, Madeline was swept away onto the dance floor. She turned once, waved and laughed, then vanished into the crowd. Indy felt sick. Why hadn't he just left his past alone? Now more than ever he was anxious to move into the future. Goodbye, Madeline, he said, without regret, and turned away. And that's the end of the chapter. Hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you soon.